Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara, Srila Sri Gaur Bhaktivedanta. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Maybe read a little bit more from Prabhupada Lilamrta. Prabhupada's in India, and he's translating and writing. He's going back and forth to Delhi, but he doesn't have any money. He's renounced his family life, given up his business, and he's taking up the life of a sadhu. This is entitled A Resident of Vrindavana. So Prabhupada, he wasn't called Prabhupada at that time, he was still called Abai. Abai preached actively in Kanpur, staying in various homes and canvassing for League members. So the original effort for the League of Devotees collapsed when the owner of the buildings decided he was going to give the buildings for some civic functions rather than allowing the preaching to go on for Krishna consciousness. So he lost the facilities. But now he's reviving this idea, or a League of Devotees, that if there's going to be any serious preaching going on worldwide, there has to be some sort of an organization. So the first effort was called League of Devotees. So he preached actively in Kanpur, staying in various homes and canvassing for League members. As the guest of the Anandeshwar Satsang Mangal, he lectured regularly at the popular Parmat bathing ghat on the Ganges. He especially made acquaintances among industrialists and educators, often sitting and conversing with them for hours. Many were impressed by his dedication and his soft-spoken talks. But his collections were small. When he offered the wealthy magnates his constitutional membership, they openly opted in favor of the 2 rupee a year subscriber membership. He collected a few letters of appreciation, but after 2 months he left. After some months in Vrindavan, Abai decided to go back to Bombay and preach. In Bombay, he quickly broke off his association with the stifling Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and moved out of the faculty residence there. He had been given an honorary position, and he found it stifling. Staying a week at a time in the homes of various patrons, he tried to generate interest in his missionary activities. When a friend of Acharya Prabhupada was Prabhupada's only disciple at that point. He was an initiated disciple, but he couldn't devote himself full time to helping the preaching, but he helped whenever he could. When a friend of Acharya Prabhupada's arranged for Abai to address Sunday evening crowds at a Bombay beach, Abai accepted. Following already established custom, he sat on a cushion and the people gathered from 500 to 1,000, sitting and listening, as he loudly spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Abai spoke for several nights, and there were other lecture opportunities also. One week, he spoke several times at a Bombay Vishnu temple. But Abai wanted to do more than deliver occasional lectures to uncommitted audiences. The conviction was growing within himself that he should preach outside India. The idea, of course, had been there for some time. He had expressed it in his prospectus for the League of Devotees. Before gatherings at the Radha Memorial in Jhansi, and during his meeting at the Birla Mandir in Delhi, and on many other occasions. Informally, he had expressed it hundreds of times to acquaintances, and he had woven his dream throughout his writings. So this is the biography of Srila Prabhupada, 6 volumes, this is volume 1, by Satsvarupa Goswami, who was Prabhupada's personal secretary, cook, bottle washer, laundry person, travel arrangement, transcriber, editor for several years in the early days. It's written so nicely. Beautiful. He was ready to travel anywhere if he could fulfill Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati's order to preach in English. In India, the English-speaking population was small, so Abai continued the dream of going to the West. He could travel to Bombay, Delhi, and Kanpur. Why not to London or New York, where millions spoke English and had never heard the message of Lord Chaitanya? Writing to Mr. Ved Prakash, a Kanpur industrialist, Abai explained his idea. So this is from the letter, several paragraphs. So in the letter he says to this wealthy industrialist, Lord Chaitanya said, Praminam Upakarya, that is to say, for the benefit of all living being concerned. While rendering first aid service in the battlefield, the Red Cross men, although equally disposed to all the wounded soldiers, they give first preference to the hopeful ones. The hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. In India, this is the letter, in India, even after the attainment of Swaraj, the mentality is predominant by made in London ideas. It's a long story, but in a nutshell, the leaders of India, in the name of secular government, have engaged themselves in everything foreign. They have carefully set aside the treasure house of India's spiritual asset and are imitating the westernized material way of life, constantly engage in acts of error of judgment, misgivings, imperfectness, and duplicity. India's Vedic knowledge is above all the conditional defects mentioned above. But we Indians at the present moment have neglected such wonderful Vedic knowledge. It is due to its improper handling. This Vedanta Sutra is presented in India by unauthorized persons of different camps, and as such the people are being misguided. Newly sprung up national enthusiasm of the Indian leaders, industrialists, and plan makers has no time, neither the desire to understand the message of Vedanta Sutra or even the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot do acts of humanity without proper guidance. So my idea of preaching in the foreign countries means that they are rather fed up with material advancement of knowledge. They are seeking the message guidance of the Vedanta Sutra, or, for the matter of Bhagavad Gita, in an authorized way. And I am sure that India will again go back to spiritual life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc., because the Indian people are now in the habit of begging after neglecting their own property. That was my viewpoint, but all the same, we must take only the opportunity of service. So that was the letter to this wealthy industrialist. And the biography continues. One way of expanding his way of preaching was to mail copies of Back to Godhead outside India. And as an incentive for enlisting donors, he made it known that the donor's name would be printed on each copy. His ambition was to bring in large donations, run large printings, and send back to Godhead to more than 50 countries. He assigned quotas. America would receive 10,000 copies, Argentina 500, Belgium 500, Brazil 500, Burma 1,000, Canada 500, Chile 500, China 10,000, and so on, including 10,000 for Russia and 10,000 for England. But the donations never appeared, and the plans for Back to Godhead were never realized at that time. Abai found that while the people of India's educated cultural classes were rejecting their own spiritual culture, the religiously inclined masses were being baffled by an array of conflicting, unauthorized doctrines presented in the name of Hinduism. So the cultured people, the educated people, were rejecting their spiritual culture, and religiously inclined masses were being misled by unauthorized doctrines. An alarming example of this came to his attention as he was preaching in Bombay during the summer of 1958. Bhagavad Week was being publicized by a group whose teachings conflicted with the pure Parampara presentation of Bhagavat. The Bhagavat, Srimad Bhagavatam, was the devotional scripture par excellence, the literary incarnation of Krishna. Yet the organizers of Bhagavat Week were using Srimad Bhagavatam to teach impersonalism and minimize Lord Krishna. Through friends, Abai learned of the outrageous meetings, and finally, on July 28, 1958, he wrote to the Bhagavat Week leader, Sri Ratanshi, imploring him to stay away from Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is the letter to this impersonalist. I beg to inform you that I am in receipt of your invitation letter in the matter of observing Bhagavat Week through the Secretary of Bombay Spiritual Culture Center. As I know what sort of Bhagavat Week can be observed by the Mayavans for misleading the innocent public, and therefore I not only restrained myself from attending the function, but I also advised many others not to attend, for the very reason that the recitation of the Holy Bhagavat is being performed by men who have no access in this great scripture, in which only liberated persons who are freed from all pretentious religiousness can take part. Some friends who attended your Bhagavat Week have told me how the pastimes of Lord Krishna were being wrongly interpreted in your organization on the pretext of saving Krishna from being an immoral personality. To save these foolish audiences in the future, Maharaj Parikshit had already asked Sripad Shukadev Goswami to clear the Rasa Leela activities of Lord Sri Krishna. The transcendental nature of Rasa Leela does not require to be apologized by any Mayavadi or mundane moralist. The Leela is what it is. In sloka number 30, it is forbidden that a mundane person should indulge in hearing Rasa Leela, or should hear Rasa Leela from a mundane person. In your organization, both the audience and the lecturer are mundane persons, and their indulgence in the matter of Rasa Leela out of sheer foolishness will result in imitating Rudra, who swallowed an ocean of poison. Nice that these letters, we have these letters. This is 1958. Abai warned that legal action could be taken against such a religious fraud, but Bhagavat Week continued and hundreds were cheated. While the professed followers of Vedic culture were being baffled in their allegiance, modern westernized Indians were rejecting Vedic culture as backwards and irrelevant. There was Prime Minister Nehru, who wasn't at all spiritually inclined. He was for modernization and for what Abai called made in London ideas. At least Mahatma Gandhi, although he had never responded to Abai's letters, had been spiritually inclined. But not so his followers, Pandit Nehru. Still, out of concern for the way India's leaders were rejecting their country's spiritual heritage, Abai decided to write Pandit Nehru. Although in Bombay, Abai was practically homeless, in August of 1958, he boldly wrote the Prime Minister expressing his conviction that India's spiritual culture must not only be revived at home, but also be distributed to the West. He reminded Pandit Nehru that from ancient Greece down to the atomic age, the Western world had seen only materialism and had therefore never known peace. If Nehru were to continue following the path of materialism, the only results would be strife and war. So this is from the letter to Nehru. Therefore, India may not waste her time in imitating Western way of life. You have admitted that the position of Indian culture is of high order, but at the same time you want to bring in material prosperity by scientific advancement of knowledge. But what is that scientific knowledge? Spiritualism is also advanced scientific knowledge. Material advancement of scientific knowledge cannot give even material prosperity to people in general. Do you think that horseless carriage, or telephone, or radio communication, or any other ephemeral facilities of life can bring in material prosperity? No, it cannot. Material prosperity means the people must have sufficient to eat or maintain the body very soundly. Do you think that your different plans have brought in that material prosperity, or that your modern Western civilization can bring in that prosperity? Even they are given that facility, the unrest will continue to go on till there is spiritual satisfaction of life. That is the secret of peace. So even without having been to the West, Abai expressed his conviction that the Americans, and even the Russians, were hankering for spiritual realization. They could not have become satisfied merely with material advancement. Pandit Nehru, therefore, should help his friends in the West by offering them spiritual knowledge from India. So the letter continues. Prabhupada writes, poverty means poverty of knowledge. Prime Minister Chanakya used to live in a thatched cottage, but he was the dictator of India during the time of Chandragupta. Mahatma Gandhi voluntarily accepted the way of living of the so-called poor man and was the dictator of Indian destiny. But was he poverty-stricken? He was proud of his spiritual knowledge. Therefore, spiritual knowledge makes a man really rich, and not the radio or the motor car, etc. Back in the 1930s, the Nehru family had bought their medicines from Abai's Prayag pharmacy, and Abai now appealed to Pandit Nehru as an old friend from Allahabad. Just as Abai had requested Mahatma Gandhi, he requested Nehru to leave his political responsibilities and, as a popular gentleman of the world, engage the rest of your life in this organized spiritual movement to make a real adjustment of Western material science combined with Indian way of spiritual realization. As with his letter to Gandhi, his letter to Nehru went unanswered. Among Abai's former Bombay contacts was Mr. Harbans Lal, a landlord who had once assured Abai that he would provide him lodging whenever he needed. In the summer of 1958, Abai went to call on Mr. Harbanshla, only to find that he'd gone to the west. When Abai learned that Mr. Harbanshla was traveling not only on business, but on a cultural mission, his imagination seized on the idea of an Indian on a cultural mission in the West. He wrote to Mr. Harbanshla asking for a place to stay, but also presenting his own cultural mission. Abai knew that many Westerners respected Indian culture. He had heard from his German godbrother that although Indians who went to the West, especially to Germany, were well received, they were sometimes tested on their knowledge of Indian culture. So Abai advised Mr. Harbanshla to teach the real conclusion of Indian culture as he traveled. And this is from the letter to this Mr. Harbanshla. I think that people need this Indian message in this hour of necessity, when the atomic bomb is hovering over the head of the human society. Please, therefore, begin the activities for the benefit of all people in the foreign countries, since you have gone there. Clearly, Abai would have liked to have gone himself. Abai also reminded Mr. Harbanshla of his promise to provide him with an apartment. Prabhupada says, I am passing my days in Bombay in great inconvenience for want of a suitable residential place. But the letter never caught up with the touring Mr. Harbanshla. Wanting to go to the West as soon as possible, Abai visited one of his godbrothers in Bombay, Kripa Sindhu, and asked him to help. So this is Kripa Sindhu, he says. He came to my house and asked me to help him in going to America. He gave me some back to Godheads, which he said I could show to people to ask for help on his behalf. I tried to do something in this regard. I introduced the Bhai Babu to one man, a big industrialist, Hemraj Kandilwala. I also went. The three of us sat down, and I told the man how Abai wanted to go to the West and how he was a good devotee and was writing and doing so many things. But somehow or other, the man did not help. Kripa Sindhu told Abai of how the Gaudiya Math in Bombay had sometimes been assisted by a pious business magnate, Mrs. Sumati Morarji, head of Scindia steamship lines. Abai tried to see her but was unable. He did, however, see one of Mrs. Morarji's employees, a deputy manager for the Scindia company, who heard him out, and to Abai's surprise he responded generously. Considering Abai a genuine sadhu, the Scindia agent offered him a 50% concession on a voyage from India to the United States. He even put it in writing. Abai immediately began arranging for his passport and visa, but he could not raise even half the fare. Back in 1956 in Delhi, he had been struggling and homeless. And now, 2 years later, as he considered his last 2 years of traveling out of Vrindavan, he felt that his position hadn't really improved. Perhaps Krishna didn't want him to succeed in this way. But one positive thing he had gained: determination to go to the West and preach. There he would surely meet with success. Krishna! Jai! There he would surely meet with success. All glories to you, Srila Prabhupada.